Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching by TBA Rabbinic Intern Nico Losorelli.
So you should have a source sheet in front of you. Luckily, there are more people than there are copies, which is always a good problem to have. So if you're able to share with your neighbor if need be, that would be really, really wonderful. So first off, as always, I wanna say that we're also navigating, including folks who are on Zoom, and also the eventual kind of recording of this, which then appears on Spotify and Apple Music and a bunch of different places. So kindly put together by Norm. And as a result, I'm going to be doing a lot of reflecting back of what each of you are saying in your responses for the sake of both the people at home and both the people also at home or maybe on the road eventually when they listen to this on any of those platforms. And since we do have some new faces and some regular faces, as I ask questions, I would love to ask you to just sort of say your name before you give your answer so we can all just continue to get to know each other a little better. So, today's shiur, you can see it's titled Kavannah, Preparing for the Ladder of Holiness. So first off, before we even start, let's define Kavannah. Who would like to take a stab at what Kavannah is? Yeah.
Intention.
Wait, what's your name?
Joey.
I mean, everyone knows Joey, but yeah.
Everybody on Zoom might know me.
That's true. So you said intention.
Right, or intent.
Or intent. Intention or intent. Great. Any other? That's great. Any other ideas? Purpose. Wonderful. And what was your name? Esther. Thank you, Esther. So far we've got intent, intention, purpose. What else? These are all great words. Yeah, Bob. Devotion. I like that. Devotion. Great. Devoted. Related to devotion. Let's get one more. Just throw it out there. Intention. Okay, intention again. We'll take intention. Great. So, Kavannah, these are all great words. Intention, intent, devotion, purpose. These are all sort of words that can be used to define the word Kavannah. So typically when we talk about Kavannah, we use it in the context of when we daven, when we pray, right? We think of a Kavannah or an intention that we set before or maybe even during when we're praying to sort of direct our attention to. It literally comes from the word, is related to the word kivun, which in modern Hebrew means direction. So when you're in Israel and you're asking for a kivunim, you're asking for directions, you would use this word, which is interesting because I think oftentimes in a prayer experience we can be sort of asking for spiritual directions. And so this idea of the Kavannah is to help us give ourselves that direction. So now that we sort of set this stage for that term, I want to jump into this list of sources here, and we're going to sort of circle back to this idea of Kavannah. So this first source here is from this week's parsha, not the one that we just read at Mincha, but the one that we read this morning. Can I have a volunteer to read either in the English or the Hebrew?
I read the English.
Great, thank you.
He had a dream a stairway was set on the ground, and its top reached the sky, and messengers of God were going up and down on it.
Great. And so who is the he here, of course?
God.
No.
No.
Fair. It's a ladder, famous person associated with a ladder? Jacob, perfect. So this is the famous story of Jacob's ladder, right? So Jacob takes a nap, puts a rock under his head, we were talking about the rock earlier, puts a rock under his head, takes a nap, and then he has this beautiful vision of a sulam, of a ladder, going all the way up to heaven to the sky, Shemaima, it says Malachei Elohim, which means sort of angels or messengers of God, going up and down. It's this really extraordinary image. And there's also kind of a directionality here, too, which is, I think, interesting of the going up and the coming down. We have these two words here, olim, which means going up, and yordim, which means coming down in the Hebrew. You might recognize the word olim as close to as related to the word aliyah, it is basically moving to Israel, making aliyah. So there was sort of a sense of going up with that idea, and it's very much the same verb here in this verse. Before we move on to this next commentary, is there anything just that strikes you about this image, about this dream that he had, about his experience? I feel like you want to say something. Yeah.
I kind of wonder if it inspired the song "Stairway to Heaven."
I wonder if it inspired the song "Stairway to Heaven." I think that's very possible. Anything else? Any sort of just thoughts that pop into your mind about this particular image?
I mean, I'm thinking Tower of Babel.
Okay, so Brian, you're saying Tower of Babel. In what way? Can you say a little bit more about that?
Well, the whole idea was to build a tower that reaches the heavens.
Mm-hmm.
When God sees that, he's like, no way.
Right.
Their language is all confused, so they can't go.
Mm-hmm.
But here, we have something that's functionally equivalent, a stairway reaching the heavens,
Mm-hmm.
and messengers of God, I'm going to say angels, are
Mm-hmm.
being able to move up and down.
Right.
So it seems like humankind cannot go
Mm-hmm.
up or down on this sort of stairway to heaven, but
Mm.
angels, if you're able to do it, you're a prophet.
Mm-hmm. Right. So Brian is sort of drawing out this sort of similarity and also distinction with the Tower of Babel. So famously, earlier on in the book of Bereshit, the book of Genesis, we have the story of the Tower of Babel, where the people build this huge tower, and then God and sort of God's consort, as Rashi I think understands it, sort of get a little jittery, and they say, hey, we've got to do away with this tower because the people are going to come up and figure out how to be like us, whatever that means. So there's this fear, and the tower is destroyed, language is confused, and everyone's speaking a different language. It's kind of a story about how did language writ large come to be. But then we have this kind of interesting situation where Jacob has this dream about this actual ladder. It's really like a bridge to heaven, or to Shemayim, right? To the sky, if you will. And he sees it. He sees these angels going up and down, these malachim going up and down. And you might think, well, wait a minute. If there was such an anxiety about the Tower of Babel, why is there this bridge? Why is this ladder? I keep thinking of it as a bridge, but why is there this ladder? And it could be like, well, maybe he can see it because it's in a dream and there's no danger of going up and down. But it's an interesting sort of contradiction in the text that I appreciate you drawing out. So the Birkat Asher, which is our next source, it's a more like modern Israeli commentary, which I stumbled upon, which I think is really fascinating. Again, it's the next source on the page. And I would love to have a volunteer who can read the English for us. Not everybody at once. Joey.
I think it's the most chance, but okay.
Yeah. You looked at me, so I figured that was you raising your hand.
Okay, ladder, Baal HaTurim. Ladder in Gematria is equivalent to voice. The voice of the prayers of the righteous, or the ladder which Malachim ascended by. Zohar, therefore, for all who have Kavannah in their prayers, the ladder is complete, they can ascend it.
Beautiful. Thank you. So there's this interesting thing that the Birkat Asher is saying here, sort of drawing in the words of the Zohar, that if anybody who has Kavannah in their prayer is actually able to ascend this ladder, which again sort of adds another element to this question of like, wait a minute, why could, if there was an anxiety about the Tower of Babel, why is there this ladder that we can ascend, that we can go up? What's the deal here? I'm so curious. Why do you think that the Birkat Asher is and also specifically bringing the Zohar to make this statement that for all who have Kavannah in their prayer, their ladder is complete and they can ascend it? Why make this statement? What does this mean?
I think they're trying. My name is Irv. I think they're trying to encourage Kavannah.
Great. So Irv is saying, I think that the Birkat Asher is trying to end the Zohar, is trying to encourage Kavannah. Can you say a little bit more about that? Mm-hmm. Right. So there's this ascension. So we're drawing in this idea, again, going back to the verb in our previous pasuk here, olim v'yordim, right? Talking about the angels going up and down. There's a certain association with Kavannah as being elevating, allowing us to la'alot, to go up, right? Great. Any other thoughts? Yeah. We'll tell everybody your name first.
Intern,
Hi.
Is there implied in this that the messengers, the Malachim, are carrying the prayers they're like, they are literally the messengers.
Mm.
Messengers from the prayers
Mm-hmm.
to, and then taking the prayers up.
I think that's a.
Is that the understanding here? That
Uh-huh.
So now you have effectively angels that are not just the servants of Hashem,
Mhm.
but also serving Hashem by carrying prayers up to the being.
I think that's a really interesting question. So the question is it possible, if I can just rephrase it a little bit, is it possible that the angels are actually in some way the Malachei HaMalachim, the Malachei Elohim, that they're literally somehow almost metaphysically carrying prayers up and down this ladder? If you have Kavannah, according to the Zohar via the Birkat Asher, and the ladder is complete, therefore are those angels sort of ferrying your prayers up to heaven, Shemaima, right? Again, this word that we see in our opening verse on this page. That's a cool question. I don't know, but I sort of do like that idea, especially since we've brought the Zohar into the mix. I often think about in my prayer this in my davening, this idea of the sort of Kabbalistic idea. I don't know, I'm not a huge Kabbalah person, but there are some ideas that really resonate with me. With the left hand as being I think it's the receiving hand, and the right hand being the giving hand, and how that can sort of like play into our prayer experience. And that is also sort of a physicalization, which I think works nicely with this question of, okay, if there is this sulam, if there is this ladder, and there are these sort of angels going up and down, these messengers of God, are they literally taking the prayer and the prayers from my hands and taking them up, which is kind of cool image, and I think it always helps to have additional images when we're davening. Yeah, Brian.
I like that image of the left hand being the receiving hand
Mhm.
because traditionally the left hand is the hand that we're tefillin on.
Mm-hmm.
And if you subtract the idea that the ring finger is the only one that has the vein that goes directly to your heart,
Mhm.
you are literally trying to take the words of Torah and bind them to your heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
The right hand is whatever the right hand is.
That's really beautiful. So Brian just drew out the idea of tefillin, right? So we typically wear tefillin on our non-dominant hands. Again, tefillin being sort of those leather boxes with the straps that we wrap around our arms for those who aren't familiar with this particular mitzvah. And we typically put it on our non-dominant hand. For a lot of people, that's their left hand. That's not everybody, of course. Some people are right-handed, and some people are ambidextrous. But oftentimes it's on the left hand. And there's this artery, there's this sort of great idea of like this artery that goes up to the heart through the left hand. And what Brian is saying is that he loves this idea of it being the left hand being sort of a receiving hand to sort of almost like receive that Torah and really draw it into your heart. And we think of this idea again. I think it comes up. It does come up in the Shema, to serve your God with all of your heart, which I think speaks to this very cool idea. So thank you for bringing it in. That's very cool. Great. So we've got this idea of going up. Before I move on, any other thoughts, ideas? I feel like you've got something brewing.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short.
Well, first tell everybody your name.
Seth.
Thanks, Seth.
So AJ's comment, I think it's related to something that I considered earlier, but kind of rejected, like the angels ascending the ladder.
Mhm.
They're messengers, and kings have messengers. God is Melech Olam, and are they delivering reports to God?
Mm.
But why would God need reports delivered?
Mm-hmm.
God is everything, and God is everywhere.
Mm.
What could God not already know?
Mm.
But then I think it is actually kind of a compelling interpretation because, there's no point in delivering reports to God. Why do we pray out loud to God?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have an answer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm back to considering that.
Right. So I'm just going to repeat and reflect. So what Seth is saying is, are the angels maybe, there's this idea that you said you initially sort of rejected, but now you're thinking about it a little bit more. Are the angels maybe delivering reports to God? Like, is this their role? And this is based on the comment that AJ made a couple minutes ago, of the angels sort of ferrying our prayers and maybe our reports up to the heavens. Again, Shemaima, the direction of heaven. But then Seth asks the question, well, why would God need these reports? Doesn't God already know? And also, but then what would be the point of prayer? So this opens up a whole theological box of a new theological box, which could be a whole series of classes, which I love. But it's really worth drawing out. I feel like you want to say something, AJ.
I was going to ask another question.
Oh, yeah.
I suspect that you're troubled by the literal interpretation, and I find that it's best not to be too literal when reading about the Zohar. You don't read it yourself, it's just every once in a while we get inputs, which are wonderful,
Mm-hmm.
but personally I don't take it literally.
Mm. Right. So okay, yeah, go ahead, Bob.
I would just add that we are in the mix.
Uh-huh.
It's not just between angels and God. It's
Right.
We are in this communication process with God.
Mhm.
We are in communion, if I may use that word,
Mhm.
with God. I mean, all of us are in communion with each other
Mhm.
and with the holiness.
Mm-hmm.
The angels are the holiness.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's creating this community
Mm-hmm.
and this oneness and this connection.
Right. So Bob is saying we're human beings. We human beings are part of this equation, part of this mix, and in a way, like partnering with God, maybe, and partnering with to use another description, Hamalachei Hasharet, which if you were like really into this idea of angelology, could be completely different malachim than the ones we're talking about right now. But I'm not going to get into that. We talk about these Malachei Hasharet, which means sort of these helping angels. So we talk about them at the beginning of Shabbat in the song Shalom Aleichem. And I know AJ that you said that sometimes it's easy to get lost in sort of like the very like visceral physical imagery, which I think is fair. And also I'm sort of really loving this idea of it almost feels like a divine like supply chain or something, right? Where it's like we're davening, the angels are coming up and down, and then they're taking these sort of like spiritual packages that we have prepared, and then they're taking them up to the heavens, and something's happening. I think it's just to take it or leave it. I think it's kind of a fun idea.
God's mailman.
God's mailman. I mean, like,
Yes.
God's UPS. Yeah.
Amazon.
Well, I don't know about Amazon. So great. So we're about to move into another source that talks a little bit about going up and down, which I'm sure many in this room are familiar with. And this is also a little hint that there's a specific holiday coming up. So we are moving on to the next source on the page, which is from which is Shabbat 21b from Masechet Shabbat in our Talmud, which deals with all things having to do with Shabbat and some a lot of extra stuff as well. Can I have a volunteer to read the English for us? And this will be pretty familiar to, I think, a lot of us. Yeah, thank you.
I'm Batya.
Hi, Batya.
The sages taught in a Braita, the basic mitzvah of Hanukkah is each day to have a light kindled by a person, the head of the household for himself and his household. And the Mahadran, i.e. those who are meticulous in the performance of the mitzvot, kindle a light for each and every one in the household. And the Mahadran Mina Mahadran, who are even more meticulous, adjust the number of lights daily.
Perfect. I'm just going to pause you for 1 second there so I can make one comment. So we're talking about sort of the mitzvah of lighting candles for Hanukkah, right? And the question is often like, why is this in Shabbat? Well, it just so happens that there's a conversation about lighting Shabbat candles that comes before this conversation. And the Talmud is sort of associative in this way, and basically saying, well, while we're talking about candles, why don't we talk about Hanukkah, because there are candles involved in Hanukkah. So that's why I say Shabbat also has some extra stuff, because the Talmud, while it stays oftentimes in this sort of like center topic, it'll often sort of diverge a little bit in an associative way, which can be fun. But it brings out this idea of adjusting the number of lights, right? So Batya, would you continue in the English for us?
Sure. Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel disagree as to the nature of the adjustment. Beit Shammai say, on the first day, one kindles 8 lights, and from there on gradually decreases the number of lights, until on the last day of Hanukkah, he kindles 1 light. And Beit Hillel says, on the first day, one kindles 1 light, and from there on gradually increases the number of lights, until on the last day, he kindles 8 lights.
Beautiful.
Guess which way we go.
Exactly. Guess which way we go. As it so often is, we follow Beit Hillel on this practice, right? So Beit Shammai says, okay, start with all 8 candles, and then as Hanukkah progresses, we decrease the light, which is sort of, for me, one of the reasons I brought this is because it's sort of related to this idea going down Yodim, right? That happens with the Malachim on Jacob's ladder. But then Beit Hillel says, no, on the first night we start with one candle, and then we gradually increase the light. So if you flip the page, which I already heard that most of you did, there isn't necessarily a reason immediately given in the Talmud for what's the rationale behind this. But there is a reason given in this other work called Megillat Ta'anit, which Megillat Ta'anit's interesting. It talks about all kinds of it sort of like chronicles public fasting and holidays and sort of ideas and laws around them. So Batya, since you already were reading, would you mind reading in the English for us again?
There were two elders in Sidon. One followed the interpretation of Beit Shammai, and the other followed the interpretation of Beit Hillel. Each one gave a reason for his reasoning. The one who followed the words of Beit Shammai said, "It's like the fruits of the harvest, in that they decrease over time." And the one who followed the words of Beit Hillel said, "People ought to ascend in holiness, not descend."
Perfect, thank you. And that last part is key, right? Beit Hillel says that we ought to ascend in holiness, not descend, right? We should add light. We should go up. And this points to this idea that we talk about when doing mitzvot in general, that we should malim b'kodesh, that we should go up in holiness and not go down. Which and I'm going to pause here before I move on to the next thing. Any thoughts? Anything popping up for anybody? Any questions? Yeah, AJ.
Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're holding that Hillel and Shammai were only partially concurrent.
Partially what? I'm sorry?
Concurrent. But in fact, Hillel largely preceded. He was like 30 years older than Shammai. Shammai died in the year 30. The current Hillel. Hillel died somewhere between -4 and 4. So it was somewhere around the secular year 0. So a lot of my sense of what Hillel's decisions were in difference, those few that they differed, has to do with, summarize it just by saying optimism. And I'm wondering whether perhaps you've read something in this regard, whether the opposite pessimism of Shammai had to do with the worsening situation in which his house of study was existing and operating. And when I think about things like this, we read it as if they are in direct dialogue with one another.
Right.
But it may not be. It may be that this was not a concurrent discussion or debate,
right,
but rather a later decision, which then later generations
right,
would overturn or simply say, no, we're not going that. We like what Hillel said. Presuming that some of those future generations, later generations, were also under distress, but also significantly later that they weren't going through, 125, 130 of the current era, that kind of thing.
right.
I don't know how long it took for this to gel. How long did it take before we came to the consensus that the decision was Hillel?
Right. So what AJ is doing is sort of deconstructing the way in which we put Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai in conversation with one another and sort of asking, is that kind of an artificial thing? Isn't there some sort of time discrepancy? That very well could be. Yeah, of course. And that is often how the text sort of considers Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai in a way as if they are in conversation with one another. And we see that on full display in Pirkei Avot, for example, our Mishnah, which is the sort of wisdom of our ancestors, the wisdom of our fathers. It begins very much with Hillel and Shammai sort of at odds with one another. I think that could open up a big sort of historical contextual question, which I would love to teach another class on, but I think I appreciate you asking it. So for the sake of time, I'm going to sort of push us through a little bit. It's sad that Brian left the room because he brought this into the space. But I'm just going to read through the piece from the Shulchan Aruch here. Again, that is our sort of major corpus of Jewish law. So I'm going to read in the English, and you're going to notice the bolded part here. So we're talking about the talit and tzitzit, right, and tefillin. After putting one's talit with tzitzit on it, one should put on tefillin, because we do mitzvot in ascending order of holiness, right? So that's the idea that we just touched upon in Megillat Ta'anit with Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel talking about the candles, the Hanukkah candles, that we should malin bakodesh, that we should go up in holiness. So there's a specific order in which we put on our talit, our tefillin, and then there's a certain order in which we take them off, right? We put them on in one order, and this is sort of going up in holiness. Again, this sort of like process of aliyah, spiritual aliyah, if you will, that we drew out in the opening pasuk with Jacob seeing the malachim going up and down the ladder. And then when we're done, we remove everything in descending order and sort of like in this process of yerida, of going down, that also features in this idea of Jacob's ladder going up and going down. Great. Is everyone with me? Does anybody have any questions about this particular concept? Before I move on, why do we even go up in holiness? What are some of the values of sort of ascending in holiness when we're doing mitzvot?
It only beats descending in holiness, right?
You said it. Herb said it only beats descending holiness. Okay, all right.
You want to always be increasing everything.
Right.
That's good.
Yeah. Can I ask you? I just want to ask you a quick question. So there's this thing that we do before the Amidah. We take 3 steps back, and then we take 3 steps forward. How is that related to this idea of going up in holiness?
Same thing. I think what I read in the commentary, it says, that's what you do when you go approach a king.
Right. So what Herb is saying
is coming from that custom.
Exactly. So what Herb is saying is that this sort of taking 3 steps back and 3 steps forward before the Amidah comes from this custom of approaching a king. It's an approach, right? And when we think of this imagery, I mean, you can imagine this sort of like throne room with maybe some sort of ramp leading up to a throne, right? And this is and this would be like a great time to use the verb la'alot, to go up, right? There's this level of approach. There's this level of sanctity. There's this level of respect that we bring to those moments, which speaks to this idea of going up in holiness. Great. And so that doesn't just happen by accident, right? In Jacob's case, it kind of did. So we're going to sort of just like bookend this particular consideration of Jacob here, where it says, Jacob awoke from his dream, from his sleep that he had, and said, surely God is present in this place, and I did not know it. Well, that's really, really lucky for Jacob, right? He had a good nap, and then suddenly had this beautiful vision, and he had no idea, right? And it just happened. How I wish we could all have experiences like that, just organically, spontaneously. But the fact of the matter is, we oftentimes don't have experiences like that, right? So that brings us back to this idea of Kavannah and why it's important. So the Sforno comments on this, saying, if I had realized the special distinction of this site, Jacob and Jacob's voice, I would have prepared myself mentally for receiving these divine insights. You can flip the page, right? So Jacob, through Sforno, through Jacob's voice, is saying, had I known, I would have set some kavanot, right? I would have set some intentions. I would have prepared myself, which I think really speaks to the importance of setting these kavanot before we daven and before we sort of make this approach to God, whether it's in praise or petition or thanksgiving or what have you. So for the next 1 or 2 minutes, I just want us to consider these last questions to sort of ponder, and we can just toss out some ideas. So given this importance of setting a kavanah, an intention, how can we, what are some tools that we can use to set a kavanah? And how do we do it? I'll just leave you a second to think about it. Yeah, Bob?
Obeying the commandments, doing mitzvahs.
Okay. So you're saying like setting that as a kavanah, like a particular kavanah? Are you saying, Bob, are you saying that obeying the mitzvot as that's a particular Kavannah. Is that what you're saying? It precedes. Okay, great. So this is asking the question of how, actually moves us on to the next question. How could it be beneficial, right? If we set a Kavannah before doing a mitzvah, it could enhance that mitzvah, right? Great. So I want us to sort of continue to think about this idea of setting a Kavannah, setting an intention. Last night at Shabbat dinner, we did this great sort of icebreaker, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, which is a rose, thorn, and bud, right? The rose being the good thing that happened in the week, the thorn being the not so great thing that happened in the week, and the bud being the thing that you're looking forward to. So the thing that you're looking forward to. And in a way, I think that the idea of the bud in this particular flower analogy is very relevant to the idea of setting a Kavannah. So as we move into Mariv, we're going to bench and then we'll move into Mariv. I want you to just take a moment or two to sort of think about what is the thing that I am looking forward to, and how can I set an intention around that, and how can I bring that into my davening? Because you're going to have an opportunity to do that as we make this approach during the Amidah for Mariv. So with that, I thank you for engaging in this learning and for all your wonderful questions and insights.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.